Tonight's story is called Where Do I Come From? And it's the first chapter of John Farman's book called The Very Bloody History of Britain. Where do I come from? No two people agree about where the first people to live in Britain came from. Mr. Patel, down the road, was fairly sure that they came from India. Well, he would, wouldn't he? While my chum, Seamus Murphy, seems to remember being told in The Goat and Shamrock that they came from County Wexford, which is in Ireland. Although it's common knowledge you could once walk to France, there's no record of England ever being joined to Ireland. Most confident of all, my old schoolmate Winston, who knows they came from Africa. After asking real experts, I found out that Winston was probably right, but I'd never hear the end of it if I told him. Since we now all appear to be immigrants, there's probably no such thing as a proper Englishman. Native Britons. Anyway, wherever we came from, our ancestors were a pretty scruffy, lazy lot, spending most of their time hanging around waiting for history to begin. They only ate what stumbled right in front of them, and unlike their posh relatives in the south of France and Spain, didn't even get round to trying to cheer up their caves by painting those daft-looking animals on their walls. Mind you, there are some amongst us, mentioning no names, who believe they did the caves a favour. However, when at a really loose end, they did do strange things with huge stones, stacking them in circles or lines like those at Stonehenge or Avebury, probably for no better reason than to drive everybody crazy centuries later trying to work out why they did it. Long after you couldn't even paddle to France, but long before the channel was chock full of strange, greasy people swinging backwards and forwards for no apparent reason, the first tourists started turning up. These swarthy continentals didn't have to go through customs. No ships, no ports, therefore no customs. They didn't even have to state how long they intended to stay. All they had to do was slay anyone who challenged them and set up home wherever they pleased. This began in 4,000 years before Christ, give or take a century. In those days, they always said BC after the date. B stood before, and C stood for Christ. God knows how they knew he was coming. Simply the fact that they turned up in boats and made some kind proves that the new visitors had more marbles than the poor old native Britons, which wasn't difficult. They proceeded to invent clothes, wheels, refrigerators, only joking, and very sharp iron spears, which made stabbing our poor forefathers and foremothers much quicker and easier. So here are some dates in history. 1.4 million years before Christ, an unknown ape man lit the first fire. 500,000 years before Christ, the first upright man made a sort of tool out of a bit of flint. 25,000 years before Christ, someone dropped a bit of meat on the fire and discovered it tasted better. 20,000 years before Christ, the wheel was invented, but it proved pretty useless until someone invented another one. 10,000 years before Christ, weapons were used for killing animals and each other. 8,600 years before Christ, someone planted a seed and discovered he could eat what it grew into. 8,400 years before Christ, the first domesticated dog in North America. Sorry, but I don't know his name.
Why?
The book doesn't know his name. 5,000 years before Christ, the sea filled up between Britain and Europe. Hooray! 2,500 years before Christ, skis were invented in Norway. No package holidays till much later though. 1,500 years before Christ, the Bronze Age in Britain.
What are those?
1,400 years before Christ, Pharaoh Amenophasis got his first engineer to build a water clock. Shadow clocks had been okay, but weren't much use if you wanted to check if it was bedtime. A water clock is a clock which works by water. They didn't have batteries in those days. In 600 BC, a Welshman invented the first proper boat, a coracle it was called. It was made from skin stretched over a wooden frame. Amazingly, they've only just stopped using them. And that's the end.